San Antonio Spurs Talk Facebook page. And the question is, what should the Spurs do with the undrafted Bryn Forbes? Harrison, this is your question. Let's go ahead and throw it to you first, bud.
Yeah, so earlier I said the Spurs should extend an offer to him at least. And I'm one of the few, I think, who's in favor of keeping him in some capacity. If you look at his split stats, he's shooting about 43% in a catch and shoot situation. My problem with Forbes is I think a lot of times, he's got that chip on his shoulder because he was undrafted and he's worked his way up. I think he tries to do a little too much. This year we've seen him in on-ball situations where he's trying to size up defenders, and he's a very good player, but he's just not there where he can, we've talked about Carmelo, we've talked about Harden, where he can, hit him with some dribble moves and then pull up from three. It's just not going to happen. He's more of an off-ball, move type of player that can catch and spot up. His defense is a liability. That's never going to go away, but he's one of those, I think if we can surround him with other good defensive players, that'll tend to drop. You look at Tony Parker in the day, never a great defender, but we've got Manu, Kawhi, Duncan, all those guys. And I think we've got some young guys who we've talked about, Keldon, Lonnie, DeJounte, Derek, all fantastic defenders. So if you can hide him in there, convince him to quit dribbling so much, and most of all, it's got to be a team-friendly deal. I don't want to pay 10 to 12 million for Bryn Forbes and have another Patty Mills contract where people aren't cool with it until the last year. I want someone who can come in, help us, who's cool if he doesn't play a lot of minutes and all that, but who can contribute when he gets the chance. Otherwise, I think they might have to let him go.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you just said. Matt, any do you feel similar, different, some?
Yeah, no, I agree with both of you guys. I mean, we talked about it, Rob, in your podcast. I think he can be an important part of this team. He's a good shooter. I was just looking up the stats last year. He was a 43% shooter from beyond the arc. This year's numbers have gone down a little bit. His points total is still like around 11 points per game. So I do think he can have a place in this team. I do think he has a place in this league, but you have to manage his minutes better. And it's like Harrison said, you have to have the right guys around him. You can't pair him with a defensive liability like DeMar DeRozan for 25 minutes a game. That's two huge defensive liabilities like in the backcourt right there. And he's like we said earlier, he's just a one-trick pony. He's one-dimensional. He's a shooter. And I think Spurs fans were so frustrated, especially in the start of the year, for a decent amount of time he wasn't shooting well. So we're all just sitting there staring at our screens like, why the heck is this guy on the court for 25 plus minutes a game if he's not doing the one thing he's good at doing? And, we got guys like DeJounte Murray and Derek White playing less minutes than him. We got Lonnie Walker and Keldon Johnson on the bench. It made no sense. So, having said that, I do think he's a great, addition to the team if he's utilized correctly. That's why me and so many other Spurs fans out there have been very critical of Popovich and his, minutes and rotations, because when you have a guy like Bryn Forbes on your team, you have to be very careful about how you're managing his minutes and your rotations around him. And, the same thing goes for some other players, including DeMar DeRozan. So yeah, if we can re-sign him and keep that shooting, hopefully in a off the bench 15 minutes type of role, I'm all for it. But, it's like Harrison said, it has to be a team friendly deal. I don't want to pay him, Patty Mills money, just the same as anybody else. So if you can keep him, but, make sure it's for the right price.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Destin, I don't think there were many people higher coming into this season on Bryn Forbes than you were. I know after the last playoff run, he went up a couple of points in your book. So going through this season, I'm sure was a little difficult for everyone. But what are your thoughts on Bryn Forbes this offseason?
Yeah, going back to last season, in that Game 7, that was huge to me. Just how he played in that game, down the stretch, and his demeanor after the game. I was like, this dude, if he had a bigger body, to me, he would be a monster. But yeah, this season, I don't blame him so much. I think all of us kind of getting at it. It's more so like the reliancy on him. You know, it's like we're just too reliant on Bryn Forbes to the point where we're running a lot of plays through him. And if that doesn't work, then our offense just looks awful for that stretch. His defense, we're putting him in terrible situations where, and I think the thing that's most frustrating about this season rather than last season is last season we had Bryn Forbes, but we all understood that we had some injuries and we didn't have, you know, the best team that we could have had last season. But coming into this season, we were expected to be better defensively, but instead of playing a lot of the defensive guys that we did have for good stretches, like discovering that Keldon Johnson is a great defender by the end of the season, it's kind of ridiculous. And putting Bryn Forbes in that situation where we have these defenders that we could help mask it somewhat, we never did. So as far as Bryn Forbes is concerned, I do notice that he added to his game, get into the paint. His floaters look way better. It's almost automatic to every time I see him in the paint or about to do a floater, it goes in. But yeah, I'm high on Bryn Forbes. I think that he's going to help us big time. But right now, the only reason why we hate seeing him so much is because we're way too reliant on him. He's not a star player or a starter, really. And he was only a starter last season because he had to be. So, yeah. I think also going into the season before last, into last season, it was such a huge jump till we were all high on him. And then kind of expecting the same this season, it just hasn't been. I mean, as far as his stats, it's kind of still the same. But, it's pretty obvious that him and the team have looked awful this season. So, yeah. That's my take on it. Keep him.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. He's an asset. Shooting's always going to be an asset in this league. I guess it all comes down to what your expectations are. Like last season, we didn't have any expectations for Bryn Forbes. This season, we had high expectations because he showed us last year that we can rely on him, that the coaching staff can rely on him. He can hit big shots. He has that defensive swagger. Yeah, he can't really guard the best, but he tries. Like he's going to put all of his effort, his body on the line, and that's something that we love to see. And that's why this coming into this season, it was such a big disappointment because we didn't see him. We didn't see that out of him consistently. And I think that, like, everyone's right. It's got to be a team-friendly deal. But I think what most people are forgetting is, like, man, he had a lot of pressure on him this year. He had a lot of pressure on him last year because of circumstance. He had a lot of pressure on him this year because it was a contract year. And he got the starting spot. And he was given the minutes. So it's like, hey, the ball's in your court, like metaphorically, whatever, literally. The ball was in Bryn Forbes' court this season. Underperformed with it, like y'all said. I'll put that on Bryn as well. I mean, Davis got paid, $7 million a year for 3-4 years, and he came off the bench, shooting our shooter. So I don't understand why we can't, work something out with Bryn, but I think it's the best interest for both parties involved to do a team-friendly deal. I think that Bryn Forbes needs the Spurs a lot more than the Spurs need Bryn Forbes. I would hate to see Bryn Forbes just be another guy that we developed, that no one knew about, plays well with us, leaves to another team, ends up being out of the league in about 2 or 3 seasons. I can easily see that happen with Bryn Forbes, and I don't want to. I don't want to see that happen. He's young. He's still 26? So 26 years old. He's got a good 4, 5, 6 years in front of him. He's a shooter. If he can turn to a JJ Redick type of role, come off the bench, your role, your sniper, we're going to put you in the best lineups to get him open shots, things like that, then he'll flourish. But he can't flourish in this role that we gave him this year. And that's on coaching staff. I'm sorry. That's on the coaching staff. But they see more than we do. They see him in practice. They're probably like, hey, man, Bryn can go. Just didn't really work out for one reason or another this year.